Today, we're going to go through the Irriwatch platform. I'm going to spend probably 20 or 30 minutes here just giving an overview of it, and then towards the end, if you have specific questions about the platform, we can certainly take questions towards the end. First of all, I want to welcome everyone. The Irriwatch platform this is our second year we've used it. They have completely redone the user interface, though. We're still learning that new user interface and go through what we like about it. There's a few things we're asking them to change. I want you to know that if you have things that you see as you use it or interact with it that you would like to see changed, definitely give us that feedback and we can pass that on. There's a lot of good data in here we feel, though, that is usable as it is. First of all, every grower is going to be in the Irriwatch platform is going to be considered a company. So when you go in there, you're gonna look for this up in the upper right-hand corner. It's gonna show you a company. I've got Chad Freehoff's pulled up here now. Most of you will only have one company. There are a few cases where growers were signed up last year and then this year. And so if you go into this browse companies, you may have multiple years underneath your name. So it's important that as you use it year over year, there will be multiple years of information in here. In 1 second, I'm going to shut my door. Okay, sorry about that. So I've got Chad Freehoff's pulled up, and I'm going to show a couple different growers today to go through just to give you a taste of what it will look like when it's super dry. Chad is out in Brush, Colorado, and they've had almost no precipitation this growing season. So you're going to get to see what it looks like when it's dry. And then, of course, most of our growers are in the exact opposite situation, and it's very wet. We'll look at a few different scenarios so you can compare what that looks like. But up across the top, you've got the organization. It just has the general information about it. And then if you go to the map view, this is where you can look at the overall picture of the field. And this drop-down menu here allows you to look at different measurements. I'm just going to go through them real quick. The moisture status is not one I would recommend to use. It's too generalized, so don't use the moisture status. It's too general. It's not specific enough. If you go to soil moisture, this is probably one of the more powerful ones that allows you to see what is my soil moisture and how does it vary across the field. Now, this can be set up based on soil type, and that's what you're seeing here on this particular field. He's got a sandy spot in the field, and so that soil in that particular area is showing extremely dry. It needs to be edited, and that's one of the things that they're not allowing us to do yet is to go in and edit those soil types, and I'll get into that a little bit more later about how that's affecting it. But basically, it's saying that this soil only has about 1/3 of the moisture in it. If you look at this soil moisture legend over here, it has about 1/3 of the moisture is what it does on this far north end. So where I use this tool is to decide if I want to look across my whole property and decide which part of the field needs water versus another part. This is where we can really start seeing that granularity of what needs to be watered. I'll pull up a couple other fields here in a little bit that give us a better taste of that because there's more zones and more things going on. But this is where we really can see across the whole landscape where we need to be watering. The crop growth is simply showing us crop growth for the day. So it's not near as useful as the total crop growth. So total crop growth is showing us how much biomass has accumulated for the whole growing season. I will tell you that the total crop growth is the one that will probably mirror your yield map. So when we get to harvest, more than likely this dark blue area with more biomass is going to be substantially higher yielding than these lower biomass red areas. So total crop growth is basically showing us where do we have exceptional growth versus less vegetation. So total crop growth is definitely something we look at and put a lot of weight in. So those are probably the two that I look at the most, are soil moisture and total crop growth. There is a good NDVI in here, but the resolution is not very good. So take it for what it's worth. There's a lot better NDVI tools out there, we feel like. It is at least relative. Actual ET is just a daily ET, not something that's super helpful in the map view. The leaf nitrogen is an interesting one. We're still learning how to use this and what these parameters mean, but it does show the variability across the field of nitrogen. Soil water potential is the same thing as soil moisture, just in a different a different scale, so to speak. It's equally as useful as far as looking at which part of the field is dry versus which part of the field is wet. For example, if we look here, over here on the east end of this field, it's a lot drier than it is on the west side of the field. So it does show the variability across the field. And then soil temperature, again, this is a thermal tool. And so that's really what they're using to get a lot of these measurements is what is the soil temperature. So you can see that this part over here is quite a bit warmer than it is over on the west side of the field. So that's the general overview of what you're going to see across the whole field. Now, the next step then is to really drill down into every zone. And so for most growers, if you've got a drip field, and I know we've got some pivot guys on here as well, we uploaded either your drip zones, your soil maps. This particular case here, this is a drip field, but we didn't put the zones in yet. We just have a soil map here. And so we've got his different zones broken out. I'm going to go ahead and switch to a different grower here real quick that has a little more information. So to switch, so let's say you do have different growers or fields that you're working with. This is where we would go in to switch those different from customer to customer, except for I selected the wrong one. Let me go to a different one here. Okay, so if I go to their map view, we've got about 2,500 acres here that we're watching. And so now if I zoom in, I can see, so I've got a couple 80s of drip here, and I can see the individual drip zones. I can see this drip zone here does not have as much moisture in it. It's a little bit drier here. It's interesting because if I go to total crop growth, I can see that this field has a lot more canopy on it than this field. And I have a little bit of knowledge of this project, and this one's soybeans and this one's corn. So I can see based on the total crop growth, we've got a lot more vegetation over here than we do here. If I was going to send somebody to the field to scout, I would want to know why this zone here has less vegetation than the other ones. So then to zoom in this particular case, we've got a whole bunch of zones, lots of things going on here at this field. And so what we can do is we can filter it by crop. So I can go in and say, I just want to look at the corn field, and maybe I want to look at this particular field. It's called the Scully field. And now it's going to sort that out. And I'm just going to see the Scully field and the Scully 80 here. So I've got his zones. And then if we go to data and insights, this is where we can start looking at things on a granular level within all of their information. So same thing here, we can filter this down. Let's go to the Scully zone number 1-3. And on data and insights now, we've got the top line information here. So we've got soil moisture, crop growth, and weather. We've got an irrigation planner that's trying to predict when we should be watering. We've got the virtual soil moisture probe, which we're going to talk quite a bit about this, how to use it and what it means. We've got actual evapotranspiration being measured at the field. We've got a tensiometer, which is essentially a similar but different metric, again, looking at that soil in that particular zone. We've got what evapotranspiration has accumulated over the year. So if we look at this red line, this is saying this is how many inches of water this particular field has used. So if we hover here, we've used 4.6 inches of water in that zone. We've irrigated, it estimates around 1.8 inches, and it's rained 11.5. Again, these are estimates, like it's not tied to his drip controller. It doesn't know what he's actually irrigated. It's basically trying to say how much water does this tool measure that's in the soil and that is available to the plant. And so if it hasn't rained, it assumes that moisture came through irrigation. It's relative, but it's not exact. So take it is an interesting piece to watch as you start irrigating. I'll go back to that Chad Freehoff project in Colorado and compare his irrigation. He's irrigated about 6 inches, and the tool says he's irrigated about 5 inches. So it knows he's been irrigating. So it is a fairly accurate indicator. Now, here where we're on the Insights tab, we've got irrigation. Then if we click on vegetation, now we can see what the vegetation is doing in that zone. So this is telling us how many GDUs we've accumulated. And then we can see what our crop growth is, the percent vegetation cover. So as the crop was planted here in May, obviously the vegetation increased. We had a field that was hailed out and that vegetation dropped within about 2 days. So understand that this is a satellite tool and there is going to be a delay. If you get a rain tonight and then you log in and look at this and say it rained, but nothing changed on the tool, understand that everything has to have time to recalibrate. So there is probably a 24 to 48 hour delay between when things are actually happening in the field to what you're actually going to see on the measurements here. Leaf nitrogen, again, we're still trying to learn how they're using this nitrogen tool, but you can see that they're modeling the nitrogen that the plant is needing versus what it's measuring in the leaf. And if we're going to use this for nitrogen management, which I'm not necessarily promoting, I think it's more of a note of interest. They're saying that this field needs more nitrogen as of a couple days ago. The model is saying that nitrogen in that plant should be a little higher than it is. And then this net carbon in soil, it's not something I'm using either, but it is an interesting metric, again, to watch. The weather tool is basically showing us what our precipitation is, what they're measuring for air temperature and GDU. So those are the key things to look at here. Up here at the top, when we're in this data and insights, it shows us when the last thermal picture was. For example, this field had a thermal image yesterday, and that's really important to look at. If it's been really cloudy, we had some instances here in the last few weeks out in Illinois and Indiana where it had been 4 or 5 days of clouds, and the grower was looking at it saying it doesn't look right because it's rained, but it hasn't recalibrated for that rain. They hadn't been able to get a thermal image through the clouds. Understand that we do need to pay attention to when that last thermal image was taken. If it's been clear skies, they've been getting an image every single day. But if it's super cloudy, you're going to see some gaps in here on the thermal data. So pay attention to that thermal data. There can be some gaps. I want everybody to be aware of that. The one thing we have noticed that everybody also needs to think about is this virtual soil moisture probe gets down to the red area a lot quicker than we think it should, but it doesn't go into the red area. There seems to be how shall I say it? It drops down and then it kind of flatlines and doesn't actually penetrate the red area until it's super dry. So we think they've got their model, needs a little bit of tweaking done to it. Part of it is related to the soil measures they're using, and they haven't allowed us to edit those. I'll show you those in a second. But when you see your virtual moisture probe down in here in this getting close to the red, I would use that as a guide that says, okay, I need to probably be thinking about irrigating, but maybe it's not as dry as this tool says it is. When you visually look at this and you say, okay, this is, if we were to visually look at this right now, we would say we've only got 10 or 20% of our water left in our soil. And that's what this little gauge here is also saying. We have an actual physical moisture probe in this field, and there's a lot more water than 20%. It's probably more like 70%. So just understand that the tool has some limitations and there's some calibration that has to happen here. Use it as a guide. It is relative, but it's not going to be exact as it drops through this green band. The blue band up here is where we consider field saturation. The red band is wilting point. And so we want to keep it between those two, but there seems to be a lot of latitude when we get down here in this bottom third about where we're actually at. I'm going to take us back to that field in Colorado just to give you a sense of what a really wet field, or excuse me, what a really dry field looks like. And then I'm going to switch to an area that's been really wet this spring. So you can see here on the dashboard, it's showing some moisture alerts. I didn't cover this before, but when we have this overview that basically says, are there moisture alerts and are there growth alerts? And so it has tagged 2 of these zones as having moisture alerts. And we're back on that same field that I had pulled up earlier. And so those moisture alerts are happening right here in this sandy zone is where those moisture alerts are happening. So the alert feature is something that kind of says, okay, these are areas you need to look at. This is probably an area that's going to need a little bit more water. So now let me go into the actual virtual moisture probe for this field. And so here you can see we've been hovering down here in this bottom third. You can see they have a shaded band higher and lower. So that's basically saying what's the deviation, what's their confidence level that we're somewhere inside that deviation band. I'll click on a few other zones just so you can see we've been hovering in that bottom third. If you go to that really sandy zone, we've just been laying right on that red line. We haven't really penetrated it much, but we're just laying right on that line of wilting point. And he's been watering pretty much every day, every other day he's been adding water. So if we go down to the irrigation amount here in evapotranspiration, so this is an interesting chart. So basically it's saying this red line is what the field is using for water, and we've been matching that with irrigation. So we've just been maintaining all the way from June 21st, almost 3 weeks now, we've been maintaining that same moisture level, and he has gotten almost no rain. So I do feel like this is accurate. Again, we've watered about 5.5 to 6 inches in this field. This is measured that we ran about 4 inches. If we go to some of these other zones, I think it shows it a little bit higher, but it seems to be fairly accurate. This zone here, it says 5.4 inches. It's pretty impressive that from a satellite, they're able to somewhat predict where that water's coming from and get fairly accurate. I'm going to switch over to a field here in Kansas at our home farm. We've been getting hammered with rain. Things are fairly wet. And if we go to an individual area, so you can see it's showing a 58% saturated soil, and it's been bouncing up and down. This is a lot more noise. Oops, let me update this. I'm on last year's data. Doing something wrong here. Let me switch over to a different one. Any questions while I'm jumping around here? If you're one of the growers that has a large amount of acres in this, so for example, we've got several fields here. This is up in Iowa that are spread out. This is where I feel like the tool will have a lot of usefulness where you can look across a large landscape and say, if I'm going to go water today, where should I water? In this case, Kelly shares a filter system between 3 different properties. And this is showing that this field here is the driest of the 3 that irrigation system needs to service. It's a portable irrigation system that he moves around. And so this is his driest field. And so I feel like for something like that, this tool is super effective at saying, where do you need to focus your attention to? Obviously, if you've got a center pivot or something like that, it's going to be a different decision point, but it at least gives you some idea of what is the part of the field. Here we're in a field where we've got 100% moisture. These guys are really wet in Iowa. And so you can see that virtual probe is basically pegged out. It's saying things are saturated. They just keep getting rain after rain. If we go down here, they haven't done any irrigation. They've gotten, what are we at here? 21 inches of rain for the growing season since April 12th. Obviously, that's a case for a lot of the Iowa and eastern Nebraska guys, but it really does, when I say when it gets to that bottom third, it's time to pay attention. It will tell you if you're too wet. It does do a really good job of saying you're over irrigating or this soil is completely saturated. It will go to the top end of that chart, just like you're seeing in this case. The tensiometer, this thing has been pegged out basically all growing season. Virtual soil moisture probe, it's bounced around, but it's been on the upper end in more of a saturated condition throughout the whole growing season. Okay, I wanted to bring up real quick some things that we're asking them to give us access to edit. So here, if we go in this upper right-hand corner, when you're in an individual field or an individual zone, there's this options button, and then it says edit field. And this is where we can select irrigation type, and it's also where they have preloaded the soil type. And one of the things we've noticed as we've gone back in and started watching this tool on some different fields is this soil type needs to be changed. There's some of them that aren't correct. This metric is directly related to what it's showing you on that virtual moisture probe. So if you go to your soil type and you're like, no, I don't have a silty loam, this is a clay loam, that is impacting what it's showing for plant available water. So they're using soil type as part of the measurement or the model that says a silty clay loam holds X amount of inches of water per foot. And so that's being taken into account when they look at when they look at how much water is in that soil. So if those soil types are incorrect, make sure you let us know. Right now, we don't have access to go in and edit those. That has to be done by Irriwatch. They are working on giving us access to that part of the tool. And that's part of what Pierre will be doing, is getting those changed. Just be aware, if you think yours are wrong, make sure you let us know, and we'll get that changed and hopefully get that updated. Okay, any other questions? Let me just go to another project here to.
Just wondering, Kurt, if there was one that gave some advised water and how you would look at the week ahead where it's advising water with rainfall integrated.
Sure, you bet. Let me go back to Chad Freehoff's here, because his was advising water. So if we go into an individual zone and we go down to this irrigation planner, it's saying that we need to irrigate this. So this top line is saying we need to put 3/10 of an inch out today, a 1/10 out tomorrow, 2/10 out on the 13th. Actually, this is the day behind. So 10th today, 2/10 tomorrow. It's giving you a little bit of a forecast, looking ahead at the weather, looking at crop growth, what the ET is currently, and what it's forecasting the evapotranspiration to be. Now, one thing that, and again, this goes back to the same piece about the soil setup. We can select irrigation type, but we have not been able to set up, even though it says I can choose it in here. When I go to actually enter this, it doesn't let me save it. An irrigation interval for a center pivot is going to be however many days you're going to go around. For example, if you make a circle every 4 days, your irrigation interval is 4. If I'm on a drip system, my irrigation interval is usually 1. So this is where we need to be able to go in and edit some things that we currently cannot. If I hit submit, I get this little notice up here that says users not authorized. That's an example of the tool is guessing what your ability is to put water out. In this case, if I was running his drip system, we would probably need to be in that 1/1500th of an inch. Basically, I need to average this out. If I'm on a center pivot, I'm only going around every 4 or 5 days. I need to add 4 or 5 days worth of advised water to get an accurate number. But again, it's a guide. It's not, don't take it as the gospel truth. Some of you guys have 40 years of irrigation experience. I wouldn't want to let this override your experience. So.
Thanks, Kurt.
Kurt, where you were showing the edit thing, there's an upload data button. What data can be uploaded?
At this point, I don't think there's anything we can actually upload. Eventually, we'll be able to upload irrigation data. We'll be able to upload soil boundaries, field boundaries, shape files, things like that we'll be able to bring into here. But right now, they're building it in, but it's not activated yet. But eventually we'll be able to tie this to an irrigation controller that says, okay, here's what we're actually irrigating, and put in some more real-time data, as well as a local weather station. That's an option, I know. And we're also talking to them about being able to tie a physical probe to this so we could have some ground truthing to it. Other questions?
If I could jump in, Kurt, and
Bet.
talk about you'd already mentioned this, but I think it bears mentioning again. As you look at the virtual probe, and Kurt's questioning the accuracy of it, using it as a guideline, the intention of the use of this satellite program is to use it in conjunction with a soil moisture probe that we know. So we'll be able to look at a known location in the field with a soil moisture probe and look at the rest of the field relative to that probe. Using those two in conjunction or together will give us the information that we need, so there isn't any guessing or any estimating on where we want to go with it. So that's the direction that we're headed with the tool. I think it gives us a lot more information than just a single point in the field. That's the limitation of a soil moisture probe. Gives us great information, but it's only at that location. The satellite program gives us the ability to see the entire field. So together it's great. Yeah, the other thing is where you're headed with this now is I wanted to ask you to look at the trends. Another thing that's really neat about the program is we can see, how am I trending? Am I improving, or am I getting worse? So go ahead.
Yeah, so I forgot to bring this up before. We have the option to do a split screen. And so now I can choose, okay, what was my soil moisture? What did it look like on the 4th of July versus what does it look like? What does it look like today? And so in this case, you can see the trend has been pretty consistent. I was a little bit wetter in this area than what I am today, but I've still got a little bit of a dry zone going on right over here. It allows us to look at those different metrics together. If we look at the total crop growth, compare that to what the moisture is, it starts to make sense. We don't have as much. The growth is being, in this case, I would propose that we're not getting as much growth because we don't have as much water here. We need to water a little bit heavier in this area. This is maybe a little bit of a drier area in the field. And again, this is where you look at this zone right here where it says, hey, here's a sandier soil. Well, that's not, it is showing up the boundaries of where those lines get drawn are estimations from things like Web Soil Survey and government databases and may not be the most accurate. So just understand it's a general tool, right? It's one of those things that if I was going to go to this field and say, okay, where should I go look right now about where I need to water or am I over watering? This gives me two really good places to go look. I'm going to go look at this zone and evaluate what's going on. Then I'm probably going to go look at this sandy area and see what's going on. And maybe I'm over watering down in here. I've got some really good crop growth, that's for sure. So if I want to do, what does my best areas look like compared to my worst areas?
Yeah, I think that's what I was just going to say. It's a kind of a report card on how we're doing. Are we doing the right things? If we are, then we're progressing nicely. If we're going backwards, you need to take a critical look and see how can I improve what's going on in this field with this information.
When we have this view up right here, you'll notice that there's two little red dots. That basically means these are alerts. This red dot is a moisture alert. If there's a yellow dot, that means there's a growth alert. And so that allows you to click on those and see where those are at in the field. And then same thing, we can take that down to the data level. And then we can see, okay, here's where I've got a moisture alert. It's saying it's really dry there. And we don't have any crop growth alerts on this particular field right now. But if we did, it would be showing up right here in this little tool in the middle.
Quick question.
Yep.
When you're using that split screen tool, how far back can you go? Can you compare like spring of 23 to spring of 24?
So you cannot. You can only compare within that growing season. And basically these dates are going to be set by the planting date. So you can see these are grayed out. This field was planted May 19th. So that's as far back as I can go is the planting date. Yeah, it does not allow you to compare multiple years. One other thing, and because this happens quite a bit, is so right now I've clicked on this individual zone. If I want to see the whole field again, I need to click back up here on this corn 2024. And now I can see the whole field again. So just a point of reference that gives you the ability to click in and out of fields. One other thing I want to point out on their legends and the way that they display things. If you notice here, so I'm on 5/19. So this is basically planting date. My total crop growth was anywhere from 37 pounds an acre of biomass to 208 pounds an acre. And so I've got blue and I've got red. They automatically change the scale of this legend as the crop grows, which can be frustrating sometimes because it changes and you go in one day and it's green and the next day it's red and the next day it's blue. And so you got to really pay attention to what those levels are. So just be aware of that these legends change on their own. It's not something you can go in and edit and say, fix it at this point. So that's something, especially on soil moisture. I don't know that it's as important on the crop growth, but if we look at soil moisture, and this particular one, it's going to give us about the same range. You can see that we have a very similar range. But when you go, let's say you log in today and then you log in a week from now, and what was blue a week ago may not be blue today. That the range changes depending on the range of measurements that they're getting in the field. I hope that makes sense. Just pay attention to those legends.
Kurt, how much does whether a field's canopied over or not affect this satellite imagery? And the reason I ask that is my soybeans have not canopied yet, even though they probably should have by now. We've got some other issues we're dealing with.
Yep. Good question. So Does it affect it? It does a little bit. They are measuring that. One of the things, if we go back here to the data and insights, there is a layer that shows crop canopy. You got to select the right date here. If we go to vegetation tab, so you can see that vegetation increases. And so what they do is they measure three things when the thermal comes over. They measure air temperature, soil temperature, if they can see it, and then the canopy temperature. They're measuring all three things, and those all three go into the model. How the model works changes through the growing season, and I would say I don't know that it works better or worse, but it does change. But that is one of the things that they're measuring, is what your canopy is. But if it is canopy, they're still using the plant temperature, which is a super good indicator of it's wet or not. And that was one of the whole kind of the backstory of how we got hooked up with Irriwatch and really became a believer in what they're doing, is because what's it been, 6 or 7 years ago, we worked with a company that had a plant temperature sensor in the field, and they were measuring canopy temperature every day, every 15 minutes. And you could tell when the drip system got turned on, within 20 minutes, the canopy temperature in that field dropped. Canopy temperature is a direct indicator of how moisture stressed a crop is. I would say the tool is going to work in both cases, whether it's canopied or not. One of the things, I'll just take that a step further. One of the things that they taught us when we started talking to them is that a dry soil reflects a lot more heat than a wet soil. And that's actually how they've built this tool, is when there's not a canopy there and they're getting the temperature of the soil, something that's wet absorbs heat, and so it's cooler. You take like a dry piece of concrete that has no moisture in it, that reflects a lot of heat. And so that's how they use the thermal when there isn't a canopy, and they can actually see that soil temperature. That's how they can measure how much water is in that soil, is based on what kind of temperature that soil is radiating. So it's a little bit more the science behind it.
If I may follow up, Kurt, just your own experience, have you any comments as far as conventional tillage versus no-till with residue cover on this soil temperature and this modeling?
It's a really good question, and the answer is I haven't gotten that deep yet, but that's a really good idea, because we would have a little bit of everything in here. We've got enough customers and enough geographies with enough different practices. That would be a really interesting thing to study. I will take that. That's a good thing to look at. That would be really interesting. And that's another, as you think about how to use this in the springtime of the year, that soil temperature is when you should plant, for example. To me, that would be another way to use this, is what soils are warm enough to plant into and would be the first ones ready to plant. I think that would be another way that this could potentially be used.
Thinking that way, we'd have to trigger it prior to planting date. You couldn't go back earlier than planting date. If we wanted to use it like that, then we'd have to trigger it earlier.
Correct. Yep. And then we could add planting date in later, which I believe is how we'll be doing it going forward for fields that get renewed year over year, is we'll be able to go in there and just update the planting date. There's a place in there to put when the crop was harvested. So we'll be able to have more of a continuous flow of data and information going forward.
Is there a year-round option for growers that have used cover crops?
Yeah, so it is a 12-month tool. Yeah, we had it. Actually, I don't know if I can get to it real quick, but yeah, we had it turned on here on one of our fields all through the winter, and I was keeping an eye on it. They've got this new platform, so I'm not sure how to get to it, but yes, you can do monitoring all through the winter as well. Any other questions? Anything I left out from the NutraDrip team? Any other ways you guys are using it, or things I missed? Like I mentioned before, we did record this, and we plan to have these meetings once a week. We're still trying to iron out which day of the week we're going to hold them. And one of the things that I think would be helpful is if you're using this and you've got questions, shoot those over to us, and we can use your questions as a case study. If it's something you're thinking about or wondering about, send those to us and we can cover them in our weekly update. So we're gonna send out a recurring meeting invite and try to hold these once a week through the growing season, so we can have an open conversation about what you're seeing and how this tool works, and try to stay caught up with everybody. Pierre Jordan, who was the one that sent the meeting invite. So Pierre is out in the field today, but he is the one on the back end setting all of this up. So if you have any questions related to logins or even what the data means, you just want to say, hey, what am I seeing here? Send Pierre an email or a text, and he can certainly help you take a look at things. And he's got a lot of experience with irrigation. He's been with us since September, but he used to run an irrigation company in South Africa. So he's got a lot of really good experience, and great to have him on the team. Of course, Tim Wolf is leading our agronomy team. Feel free to reach out to Tim. Brett is leading the team for moisture probes. So if you got any specific questions for moisture probes, we can certainly answer those as well.
If I could do a shout out to Pierre on, there's a lot of work that goes into setting all this up, especially when Pierre did the background of soil type and each of your different drip irrigation zones. A tremendous amount of work that he spent. Shout out to him and all the work that he's done with this. It's a tremendous task, and he's done a beautiful job.
Will the recordings be available?
You're muted, Kurt.
Yeah, sorry. The plan is to put the recordings will be available immediately on Microsoft Teams. If you accepted the invite, you should be able to get access to them immediately. The other thing we will do with these, though, is we'll download them and then upload them to YouTube. If you go to the NutraDrip YouTube channel, I would say within a week, we'll have it up on YouTube, and it'll be a lot easier to access there.